the Senate budget hearing, and one of the senators had a list of, I don't recall, 400 some data points that he was concerned about us collecting, including personal family information, income information, things like that. We don't collect any of those things, and so when we actually gave them the actual list of things we do collect, his concerns were allayed. So to the extent, I mean, the information we collect now is strictly for purposes of accountability and compliance with various policy level decisions that were made by either the federal government or by you all, the state government, for purposes that have nothing to do with their individual kids.
Will you supply that,
Sure.
that list to our committee again?
Absolutely.
And the reason why we are concerned about data mining, data control, you know, is we've seen the Department of Revenue just last year release millions of people's names and numbers that were conceal and carry, and all the information that gets leaked out that's not supposed to get leaked out and stuff like that. So people are very, very sensitive, and we have doctors now that are when you go get your annual physical every year, they're wanting to know if you have a gun before they ask you how your heart's doing and how your diabetes is under control. They want to know whether you have a gun. And you know, and sometimes when you ask young children, because I know like my grandchildren, they're small enough that they don't know to lie. Us adults, we can lie. We learn to lie. Little kids don't learn to lie until they get a little older. But sometimes they can answer the question wrong too. And so, you know, innocently answer a question, and they may set your parents up to be something that they're not either. So all those data things really kind of concern and bothered me. But let me ask you another thing. You know, the Show Me standards are what we're using today, right?
Correct.
And we've used them, what, how many years? 15 years, 20 years?
20, I think they were put into place in 1994.
And we've just now decided that that's failing, that they're not going to work. I mean, it took us that many years.
No, the Show Me standards are still in place. Those are like the umbrella standards.
Okay, but is it good or bad?
They're good.
Okay.
And we're not changing those.
Okay.
What we're changing are the course level and grade level expectations that are essentially the subset of those Show Me standards. They're the specific application of what we expect kids to know and be able to do in each grade level and in each course.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't know. You're the educator, I don't know. Could you have built on what the Show Me standards and built and rechanged and refocused that in a different way than Common Core and still not cost us so much money and so much concern out there in the public?
We could have and did adopt the Common Core based on their alignment with what we expected in Missouri in our Show Me standards. So when we did the crosswalk, it was to make sure that we weren't leaving things out, but rather either, as Mike pointed out, going deeper, not broader. So those were always a part of our process. I think the point I want to make here to your question is whatever we did, whether we sat in a room by ourselves and developed them, or asked you all to develop them on this committee, or had, you know, however we did it, we still would have the increase in assessment costs that you're seeing. And that's what you're talking about. Not the standards themselves, how much it costs to measure them. And that cost would be the same, irrespective of what standards we used.
Okay. One more question. And again, do you think that the educators, because I know every educator, every superintendent, every teacher wants the best outcome. Every parent, everybody's in the same ballgame there. There's no question. But do you think that the educators, the top people, the superintendents in each district in this state and throughout this country, do you think they were maybe influenced by a bunch of billions of dollars that the federal government was going to put in because of the Secretary of Education under under President Obama, that maybe that's influenced that initial decision of to do Common Core? Do you think that, that might be
I do, I think that while the motivation for creating the Common Core came from states, unfortunately, that the Common Core itself was used for as a carrot for other purposes coming out of the Department of Ed and by the federal government. I think that's very unfortunate, because one of the things that we're finding now is that as that's happened and people talk more about that, and frankly, every time the Secretary of Education speaks about education, every time he mentions the Common Core, it becomes harder for us at the state level to convince people that these are not his standards. These are not standards that came from the Department of Education. So I think that's unfortunate, and Michael could probably speak to this a little
so
more.
let me ask you this, and then let Michael speak. But so I thought Arlie Duncan did create and start I mean, that's he didn't. The edict didn't come from the Secretary of Education under President Obama.
No, the history was that this started back in about 2007 or 2008, after many groups, including ours, kept pointing out that so many states had such low standards. And finally, the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers, the state superintendents, came together. It was largely funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to say, okay, we're going to see if we can come together around some common English and math standards. And then they started the process, state input, input from other educators, drafts, etc. And then we ended up with the standards we had. Along the way, President Obama gets elected, comes in, and as a part of the stimulus, this Race to the Top program was created, $4 billion, very little language in the bill about how it needed to be shaped. The Obama administration took the initiative to flesh it out, and one of the things they put in there was basically if you agree to do Common Core, you get an extra so many points that people said that's going to be important. So the way I read it is this started as a state-led initiative with support from private groups like the Gates Foundation, and then was politicized by Barack Obama. Now, it's surely true that we would not have seen as many states sign on as fast as we did were it not for this money, and so that's an issue. But the commissioner is exactly right. The more the administration takes credit for this or talks about it, obviously the harder it is. It creates this impression that it is a federal initiative. It clearly was federal incentives, but it started out as a state-led effort.
Okay, thank you.
So more into that line of thinking is, has that money that's come down from the federal government, I'm sure is exhausted by now. So do you think that's why these states are pulling out, is because there's no more federal money involved, and so they've taken the federal dollars and no more money, and now they're pulling out of Common Core?
You know, I've been following this closely and testifying like this all over the country, and what I see is two things. First of all, big concerns over the federal role, just from conservatives. I'm conservative, I understand that for sure. And the second concern over the data question that we've talked about. And I think in that case, some opponents of Common Core have been trying to connect those two issues in ways where they're really not as connected. I think that, now again, I want to point out, no state has completely pulled back. Even in Michigan, they did pause implementation in terms of spending, but the House, just a few weeks ago, the Republican-controlled House, voted to allow the funding to go forward. Now it's waiting for the Senate, and it's expected will probably do the same. Indiana has decided to hold a bunch of hearings on the Common Core, which has happened, but just a few weeks ago, again, they came out with the committee finished its work and deadlocked on whether to propose to have the state pull out of the Common Core. So we still have not seen any state take a legislative action or any other action to pull out of the Common Core. There have been some states that have pulled out of the testing consortium, and it's not clear what they're going to do yet. So I think that mostly this has been an issue of concern from conservatives, certainly fed by the Glenn Becks of the world, making a lot of statements out there. Well, what I'm saying is that there have been similar concerns for 3 years, and then what really got it, I think, to become a much more prominent political issue has been a couple of people with a big megaphone who got the word out last spring.
Okay. You know,
It's not okay.
one of my concerns is I was educated in the public school systems in this state, and you know, back when I was being taught, things were a lot different then, and those types of teachings didn't hurt me at all. And as I grew up, and as I went into business for myself, and as I hired young people to work for me, I found them lacking more and more and more in some of the skills that were standard that I learned. And we started all these other programs, and it seemed like they were lacking more and more skills as we went on. And my biggest concern is that when we make these standards, or whatever you want to call these, that we're going to teach these children, much more difficult, much more aggressive. Are we really moving forward, or are we still moving backward? Because we still have the difficulty of these students. We're trying to teach them more, which we've always tried to do, but my experience has been that I've watched them and they haven't moved forward. So do we want to go another 15 years and move backwards again, is my concern. Sometimes it's not embarrassing to go back. In my company, when we make decisions and they don't work, sometimes we roll all the way back to the basics and we start all over because we've lost our way. And sometimes I wonder if maybe we haven't lost our way here in Missouri with the educational programs we have, because we don't seem to be moving forward. We seem to be moving forward more in the rigorous of methods to teach our children, but our children don't seem to be following well. And those, I just like to express that, there are times when there's no shame in going backwards, none whatsoever. And I don't know if you all have thought of that, but I just want you to know there's no shame in it. It's about our children. It's not about what they learn or anything. As far as competing with another state, I don't care about the other states or the other countries. I'm more concerned about what my children learn in this state. And so, just making a comment, would you like to?
No, I think that's very well put, sir. And I think Representative Spencer is absolutely right that there's been this terrible history in education of the flavor of the month and constant changes. We got some real things wrong. And we had the whole era of reading wars where we thought we didn't need to teach kids phonics. Well, that was a huge mistake. Where we had this idea that, we've got calculators now, so little kids don't really need to master their math facts. Another huge mistake. Just to say that the reason why we at Fordham, who have stood up for these kinds of traditional values in education for a long time, like these standards, is because they do go back, and especially in a couple of those key examples, to those fundamental principles, and principles that have proven to be effective scientifically. That you've got to teach kids phonics, you've got to teach them the arithmetic, those kinds of basics have got to be mastered, and that's where these standards are particularly strong. Now, I think, we've got to see that even in Missouri, though there hasn't been as much progress as you'd like to see, you have made some progress in raising the achievement for the lowest performing students. And that we see that nationally. And under the No Child Left Behind Act, which is much maligned and deserves a lot of that, you have seen big gains since the mid-90s in how the lowest performing students have performed. And that means that people today are literate who would otherwise have been illiterate, right? And we've made gains at the bottom. Unfortunately, we have not seen those same kind of gains for the average students or for our top students. And so now the question is, we know we can, if we set a low bar, like we did under No Child Left Behind, and hold schools accountable for getting students over that low bar, we can make progress. And the question now is, if we raise that bar, can we also make progress in getting more of the students over that higher bar? I think you see some states like Massachusetts that are ahead of the rest of the country who have shown that you can do that. That's now the task, to take this big group of kids in Missouri in the middle who aspire to go to college, who graduate from high school, they go to college, and then they end up in remedial education. And by and large, they drop out. The question is, can our K-12 system do a better job getting those students up and ready for those standards so that they can succeed either in college or in career? I think we can do it, and I think we got to get on with it. And the big thing I've heard here today is that we're 3 years into implementation and most districts have already